Hello. Welcome everyone to today's podcast episode, where today we'll be talking to our special guest, who is an expert in their field of medical science, or more specifically, biomedical physics. But before we get started and hear all about their journey into this field, some tips and tricks they have for success, and get a sneak peek at some cool gadgets to use, I want to let you know that How to University recently launched a course all about MedSci and fields similar to what we'll be talking about today. In addition, this course will help you understand what you're learning in the medical science program, which will then help you determine if it's the right fit for you. So, if you're in high school and thinking about a medical science degree, are about to start one, or are already in the program and are looking for jobs or opportunities, then go check out this course by creating a free account now. So, with that being said, thank you for tuning in. And as always, please like this video and subscribe to our channel so we can continue to bring you all the helpful information that you might need. So let's get this conversation started.
I'll give you a warning that the puppy dog's in the background, so if you hear something, you might. she's getting restless, of course, that time of the day.
That's okay. We're all at home. If you hear banging on my door, I apologize in advance too.
Awesome. We got it all covered then.
Hello, and welcome everybody to another career episode here on the How to University podcast. Today, I am joined by my wonderful co-host, Jillian Giovanetti, our outreach director here at How to University. As well, I'm so excited to welcome our guest, Tamie Poepping, professor of biomedical physics at the University of Western Ontario, which just even saying that out loud is an insane title to me. But thank you so much, Tamie, for coming on today.
My pleasure. Nice to see you both and meet you and to hear about your How to University. That's pretty cool.
Appreciate it. So before we get started, I think it would be a great opportunity for anyone who's listening for you to briefly introduce yourself, maybe what it is that you do at Western University, a background, and if you want to share a passion outside of your career, that'd be great too.
Sure. So I am professor of physics and astronomy at Western, and my research involves medical physics or biophysics. So in particular, I look at flow-related problems for blood flow and disease, how it relates to disease, or how it might relate to cellular function and things like that. So anything that you can take physics and blood flow and put it together, then I kind of work on that. My passions, well, I like physics, and I really like introducing young scientists to research. So I take on a lot of junior people, first year all the way up into graduate studies and postdocs to look at research problems. And so that's really what I like doing. I like working one-on-one with students. Even though I teach some of the really big courses, my passion is more the one-on-one teaching and the hands-on teaching. So I enjoy that. At home, I just like hanging out with my daughter, doing things with my daughter, and taking her biking and running, and a lot of that involves our new puppy these days. So if you hear things in the background, little squeaky toys and stuff like that, you'll give you a heads up as to what's going on.
Honestly, if she wants to be featured, they can top on the podcast too. That is all okay. I'm sure no one will complain about a puppy jumping on here.
She's trying every once in a while.
She's
so
trying.
We'll see at the end.
To start us off, would you mind explaining to the viewers out there what medical biophysics is, and maybe in as simple terms as possible for us non-physicists out here?
Yeah, well, it goes by a few names, and it's just a spin on it, kind of trying to lump it all together. So you might hear the terms medical physics, medical biophysics, or biomedical engineering. And those are all sort of just different overlaps of it, but it's basically applying the physics and engineering to solving either medical problems or biological problems, or like clinical medical physics is then in cancer centers where you're applying radiation and lots of working with the accelerators and things like that related to cancer treatment. So we use them kind of loosely, those terms loosely. So anything overlapping between physics and medicine and biology.
Do you mind giving like an example of something I guess someone would learn maybe in one of those first year courses that you cover, or maybe some concept that first years get really excited about going into a course of yours?
So in the first term of physics, we do a lot of mechanics and things like that. And so you're learning a lot of the basic problem solving, right? So even though people might not recognize it, if you're working on gravity and you're working on vectors and things like that, but that applies to a lot of different problems. And so we use those all the way through, but something that might be more applicable is like fluids. So once you start studying fluids, well, now that can be applied to blood flow. So you learn the basics of blood flow, you're learning the basics of flow, then you're starting to learn about blood flow. Of course, it's pulsatile, so it starts to get a little bit more complicated. But then what's really interesting, second term is on electricity and magnetism. So you might not think there's much overlap there. But actually in circuitry, you talk about resistance and our capacitance, and we use those in analogous way in blood flow because our vessels have resistance. So the smaller the vessels, then it's harder to push flow through them, and they have compliance, and that's the equivalent of a capacitance. So you get those kinds of analogies that come through, and I really like showing those kinds of things and how the very basics of the physics that you might not think is applicable is to all the way up into our research areas. Those first year ideas carry over. And likewise, I see it that the students, they don't want to take physics because they think it's going to hurt their GPA for getting into med school or something like that. But actually, our students from physics come back and say, I had such an advantage because I could do the critical problem solving that you need for medical school when you're trying to solve problems. And they also did better on the MCATs. So it really actually helped them out in the end. So.
Yeah, no, that's interesting to think because a lot of, I guess, misconceptions or expectations versus reality in terms of where that overlap is. And I'm definitely curious to hear about the projects and such that you've gotten to work on without those two supposedly separate fields, but also in this case, very related fields actually overlap. But Jillian, I think you wanted to jump in with a question as well.
Yeah, so you mentioned that some first years think they don't need physics. Is that one of the more common misconceptions about the field and the work you do?
Yeah, we definitely see that because we see a lot of people that will shy away from the physics all the way back to high school. So students drop out of it in high school, and then they get really burnt because they come to university, and now the students that shied away from it have to catch up with the students that actually enjoyed it, and they're all in the same class, right? So they get kind of burnt later. So that's in one way. But we also see them shying away because they don't want to hurt their GPA or whatever, and they're really missing the critical skills. Example is that some of them might go on to radiology later. Well, now you're doing waves when you do ultrasound, you're doing electricity and magnetism when you do MRI, and you're doing radiation as well, E&M. Electricity and magnetism or electromagnetism when you do the radiation treatments and things like that. So it all comes back around, right? So physics will get you. It'll catch up to you. So you might as well embrace it.
Yeah, it sounds like it's everywhere in our lives. And my friends and I did high school physics for a bit, and I can definitely see how, the people who kind of dropped out and maybe regretted that later.
Yeah, no, Tamie, when you were saying that, I kind of had to look away because I'm one of those people who are guilty of not finishing physics in high school. That was the only science that I couldn't see through. But obviously, I feel like maybe a good piece of advice based off what you said for those in high school is complete physics in high school, since, once you come to university, you're going to have to do it if you're going into a field such as engineering or anything physics related. And I feel like, I'm assuming in high school, you learn it at a slower pace than in university.
You do, exactly. And so all the medical science students that come through, they were maybe avoiding it because they thought they're not doing physics, but they all come here and they have to take first year physics, and then they have to do the crash course, right? They have to do it really fast.
Yep. Yep, exactly. Are there any other, I guess, a follow-up to that, any other misconceptions about the field that you're in, maybe in terms of like how different other fields are related, other majors, what's intertwined, what's in high school is, useful once you're actually in university, anything along those lines would be curious to know about.
Well, I guess that applies to the physics in general again, because people don't often think that they're going to be using the physics or going on in physics, and we often get it at the open house days and things like that. Students are like, well, what am I going to do with a physics degree? Well, pretty much anything, because in fact, it's our graduates do very well to go get a job because they've got problem solving, they've got critical thinking, they've got programming, they've got the math, right? And so they're not easily intimidated by the topics. They just go and learn what they have to do and then apply it. So I think in that way, there's a bit of a misconception, like, what are you going to do with a physics degree? And it's kind of, I guess I want to say, it provides you a really broad tool set, right? To go and get a job. You've got great skills to go out there and get whatever job you want. And so that applies quite broadly to that. Students shy away from it, but it's actually a very good skill set to have. And like I said earlier, it applies to all these different things that you end up doing, right? So sure. That's the other thing then. So I'll say that the other perception is that it's really hard and there's lots of math and things like that. But if you're not afraid of the math, you'll learn the math as you go away, and it's a very powerful tool to have. So people get kind of intimidated by that math, and it's not all math. Like, you're learning lab skills and things like that along the way as well. So I think it's a very good skill set to have.
In general, the courses that you teach, what are some challenges that students face, and maybe any advice that you have for students going into it to overcome them?
The challenges they face, I think I see one of the biggest challenges is students being very grade centric. So they're very focused on the grade rather than understanding. And so if you stop to understand the physics and really understand it, it'll help you later, even in the course, just carrying on through the course, and it'll build so that you're now learning how to solve that simple problem that's going to help you later. Whereas if you kind of cheat and you just want the right number and you keep plugging numbers till you get the right number, then it's just going to get more and more challenging, right? Because you haven't set yourself up for success later. So I think that's what I see as one of the biggest challenges, because physics, a lot of the problems come out as a number, like the answer is 5. Then students focus on that and they just want the right number, and therefore they will get the right grade, or get a good grade. And rather than focusing on, like, no, I just want to understand it and make sure I understand it, because that'll help me later.
Beyond that, or maybe what is it that students who do understand it or take the time to understand it, what is it that they're doing? What are some best practices that students can, I guess, employ in order to ensure that they do get that strong understanding of the material, so that they do garner all the advantages they can from understanding the material?
I guess I'd say 2 things. So one is to practice. Like it's not one of those things where you just memorize and go away. I relate it back to when I was studying chemistry and biology, cue cards. You just memorize it and you're good, right? And it doesn't work that way with physics. You really want to practice, like do the problems, do more problems and more problems. And I've seen that in both ways. I've seen it where students, won't do the problems, they do the bare minimum. And I've seen others who come in and are struggling with it, and they just practice. They end up doing like the entire book. They just do every question. And that's what gets them a good grade, because they're like, okay, now I can handle all of these now, right? So I think that's an example where a good practice. So lots of practicing.
So like the questions in the textbooks are what you're
in
suggesting?
The textbook or anywhere. Yeah. Just, okay. I mean, you can find lots of examples online as well, but going through the examples in the textbook, I mean, first off, doing the problems that have been laid out by your instructor. Usually there's a list of problems for just practicing. Then there's the assignments themselves, right? do them honestly and practice yourself. Not that you shouldn't work in groups, but you should honestly be doing the problems yourself, and not just copying from someone else. That's not going to get you anywhere, right?
Gotcha.
So I would say that's one of the best practices is going that way. And the other one is asking questions. So engage yourself and ask the questions. If you're just sitting there mindlessly in class, you're not taking it in. You have to really answer the questions. And you see that in the style of teaching now, in that we're always trying to engage you and get you to answer something, right? Because it forces you to do a little bit of an honesty check, concept check. Do I really understand this material? So if you're answering the questions, then, and you get them wrong, then if you're just sitting there and you're kind of like, oh yeah, I know this, probably you're not going to get as many right as you think you are, right? And so you got to be honest and engage yourself in it. And asking questions as you go along will also keep you engaged, right? So ask questions and practice.
You were giving such sage advice to all these students. Is that something you've kind of gathered or learned from observing the students, or has your experience really played into it as well, and how you've gone through schooling?
I think it's both, definitely. I mean, when you're teaching and so on, you're always learning on the fly, right? So you do something and it flops, and so you try it differently the next time. So it's a learning curve, but it's a tough learning curve because it flops in front of 1,000 students, and you just got to suck it up and move on. But so definitely I'm learning from that. I learned from what it was like for me as a student, and what I liked or didn't like, that way. I also learned by being a parent. So I learned through some of those things reverberate now when I try to teach things. So I would think all of that goes in there. And I'll also say, you say I have such sage advice. Well, it never honestly feels that way. But I'll say it's easy to give advice. And I think students often look at profs and people and they're like, oh, they've got this all perfected. I'm like, no, we're still figuring it out too. So be easy on yourself. I think in this day and age, especially with social media, it looks like they've got it all polished and figured out. No, it's not only a learning curve, it's a constant ongoing process, right? So what you believe might be the right thing to do today, as far as teaching, actually you abandon that practice and you try something different, right? So we're always learning, and I'm even if I have advice, it doesn't mean I've mastered my own advice, right? So you got to keep learning, and you got to keep trying to improve yourself and improve what you do, and hopefully have fun along the way.
Yeah, no, I relate to that, in that, everyone is trying to, keep it together and put on a show of keeping it together. But as you said, in reality, we're all still figuring it out and should be continuing to figure it out. I feel like at no point should you really stop learning, and everything you've said really resonates with that. So I just want to say thank you so much, Tamie, for coming on this podcast. Before we close it off, are there any last words of wisdom, whether it's for anyone going into medical sciences, engineering, anything, any major, anywhere across the board, that you would like to give some advice to?
I guess just, follow your passions. So keep yourself honest by following something that interests you, and keep going. Don't take the easy route because this course is going to give you a better mark, an easy mark, or whatever, right? Follow what really interests you, and it'll pay off later, because now you have that. You liked physics, and you thought it might give you a tougher challenge and a worse mark, but later you got the advantage, in medical school or whatever, or that job that is like, oh well, now I've got this. It sets you apart when you really enjoy something, and then you're good at it as well. So I guess just follow your passions and don't be afraid of failure. So.
I love that. I think that's advice that I would like to take as well. So I appreciate that so much. Thank you so much for taking the time out of your day, especially the time out of your dog's day, because clearly they need you right now too, to hop on a podcast with us. I've learned a lot. I'm sure Jillian, I can speak on her behalf, also learned a lot, and hopefully the viewers who are listening in, feel free to let us know if you have any questions or comments down below. And Tamie, I hope we can talk to you again sometime.
Yes, it was lovely meeting you. So thanks for reaching out, and I'll keep my eye out to see how everything works out at the How To University.